Well, good afternoon. Welcome to session 4 of the Church Communications Strategy Training course. This is the 4th out of 7 sessions, so we are now past the halfway point. Thanks so much for staying with it. I've got one last presentation today that is for both church communicators and church leaders. And then we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty communication tactics. So that'll start next week. I'll tell a little bit about that at the end of today's presentation. As always, I'm Peter Frank. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing Technology here at Concordia Publishing House. Part of that is leading the Concordia Technology Solutions team, where we work with all sorts of different software solutions. On the marketing side, I also get to work with all of our marketing automation software, our e-commerce solution. So I'm in the tech stuff all day. But the most important part for me is the strategy, knowing why we do the things that we do. How can we best reach our audiences with our products and our services and our training courses like this? So that's why I'm here. Feel free to reach out to me at any time with my email address on the screen, peter.frank@cph.org. A few housekeeping items before we begin. I'm planning about 50 minutes for presentation, 10 for Q&A. I always tend to go over those 50 minutes. If I feel like I'm succumbing to in the battle, if I put 55 on there, that's probably more likely, but I really want to try to shoot for 50. So that's what I'll be going for today. Now, all attendees are muted. We have a lot of people here today. I can't have everybody talking over each other. So I'm the only one who you'll be able to hear during this presentation, but that doesn't mean I don't want your participation. So please ask questions throughout, put them in the chat. I think you might have it say questions on your end. So just let us know what those questions are. I have James on the line with me. If you have any technical issues or you're wondering where something is, he'll be able to point you in the right direction. And he's also very well versed with all of our communication strategy here. So he's happy to answer questions as well. One way or another, we're going to get your questions answered. Now, we are recording this. The recording will be shared. We'll put it in our resource center tomorrow morning. I'll also send out an email and share it in the Facebook group. So I'm going to try really hard to make sure you get it. It'll be fairly early tomorrow morning, hopefully by 8 or 9 o'clock Central Time. Quick overview. This might be your first session. So what's included in the Church Communications Strategy Training course? Well, every Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time, now until June 9th, or it started a few weeks ago until June 9th, we have a weekly webinar, which you're on right now. We have a weekly blog post, which launches at 2 o'clock, and a weekly download, which will be connected to the blog post, but if you're attending here live with us, you can find it in the handouts. So today, we've got the content map worksheet. It also takes you through the message map process. There's not a lot of details on the worksheet because I assume you're watching this presentation too. So if it doesn't make sense yet, finish up the presentation. It'll make a little bit more sense at the end. This is our schedule. Like I said before, we're in the 4th of 7. Next week, we're going to dig into social media, church websites, and campaigns. Now, there's a lot more in those next 3 topics than what I put there. They all follow a certain framework. And so I'll introduce the framework next week, and then we'll dive into social media. And on the church website side of things, there's 2 components of the framework that we'll be going over. Both of them can be handled by your website or through other tools. And then campaigns is putting it all together. So we've got a lot of exciting things coming up. Church leadership, you are welcome to stick around and pay attention to it, but we're really going to focus on those communication tactics. At this point, though, we're still on content maps, and that'll include message maps. It's all about the strategy. So I want to clarify one thing, just because it keeps coming up, and I think this helps if you have this understanding. These sessions provide tools for creating a strategy for your church, but it's not the one-size-fits-all solution. You don't have to do every single step exactly the same way, and you might jump back and forth between steps as you go through it. Again, they're tools, and use them as they are appropriate for your church. Not all the tools work for every situation, but this is what I have learned through a variety of experiences, and I found them all to be helpful at different times. So I hope they're helpful to you too. Last week, we talked about journey maps, and that's going to be a key part of getting into the content map. So I'm going to do a review of that because I think that'll lay the groundwork for what we're covering today. Well, a journey map is the communications equivalent of a sales funnel without the sales. Sales funnels are very common within business. Even marketing departments, many companies have marketing and sales. Well, they have a marketing funnel and a sales funnel, and they should align pretty closely. They don't always, but that's kind of the concept. But if you're in the church, you may not have had that experience with the sales funnel. So this is what an example looks like, where you go stage by stage, each time starting with a big pool of people and narrowing it down to a smaller group where finally you have customers. And those customers are the ones who pay you money. Well, that's not what we're about in the church. Certainly we need money to support it, but we use what's called a journey map. It tracks your audience's actions throughout the completion of your church's desired results, but those results are tied to your mission, not to your checkbook. So it looks kind of like this, and we're going to use this in a variety of ways. I'll show you some other examples in a few moments, but you have different events, different actions that your audience takes along the way, and then between those actions you have stages. So it's another way to segment your audience. Personas is one way, journey map is another way, and I'm going to show you the combination of those two with the content map. With a sales funnel, again, the emphasis is on financial success, but on the journey map, the emphasis is on progression. It's all about the next step. We talked about that quite a bit, the timing of it. The journey maps show what's the timing for the relevant message. Today we're going to talk about that message and how it's going to change based on your persona. Journey maps also focus your communication on a primary call to action for each stage. Call to action, or CTA as we call it in the biz. CTAs are the next action. Usually they're buttons that you put in your digital communication or statements that you put in written communication. They're what you're asking your audience to do. And if you know what you're asking your audience to do, the rest of your message can support that, as opposed to giving them a laundry list of things that they need to accomplish. So the actions are the desired activities. You'll see those listed there. We'll cover them in more detail later. And the stages are at that top level. Those are the groupings of people. The stages are to whom you communicate. The actions are what. Well, what if your journey map needs to be a little bit more complex? And there's a lot of ways. And I think most cases, unless you are a small, kind of singularly focused church, I don't think I said that right, a single focused church, you're going to have a little bit more of a complex journey map. So this is the example that I typically go back to. It's nice and clean, very sequential. Well, you might have multiple actions that move people along in that journey map. I think that's very common. And many of the actions will tie into different audiences, different personas. So that's kind of the base layer of complexity. But you might also have multiple journey maps. If your goals, if your ministry has two kind of different directions, they may be parallel like you see here. They're not going in opposite directions, but they require very different actions. And of course, people at different stages will have different next steps. You might have one person who's a singular persona, but they're on both journey maps at different stages. And so there's a few examples like that. We talked about that last week. I'm not going to get into too much detail. But sometimes you might have a journey map that merges. So you might start off with two different focuses or two different audiences that take very different actions, but they merge together at the end. You'll see here where you have essentially different kind of age groups. An adult prospect, somebody who's well into their career but still single. They're not in that family mindset yet, and a family that could be engaged with your school or your preschool, and they merge together to eventually just become a regular attending member. So they might merge together, or they might flip it around. You might have a starting path that's the same, and you split it out towards different goals. Again, depending on who your personas are and what the ministry goals of your church are. And so any one of these could work out very well in your congregation. It just depends on your situation. We might ask the question, well, how do I know which stage each member of the audience is positioned on? And I want to be careful to clarify, that's not just people who have membership in your church, but members of the audience. Well, dynamic data generated from either your church management software, your marketing platform, those help a lot because, again, they're all based on the individual's actions. This is all about what they are doing. You're encouraging them to do it, but you're not doing it for them. And then static structured data track from forms or conversions, as we call them. Those next stages, you can ask people questions. So if they're signing up for an event, ask what kind of, you can define your personas as what best describes you. You'll see that on some of our forms that we use in CTS. And then also just simple verbal communication. We are in the church. We are not in a faraway building communicating with our consumers. We are in the midst, talking to people, working with people, worshiping with people. We understand our audience because we are our audience. We're with them. And so don't ever underestimate the value of conversations. So today we get into content maps. This is aligning your messages. We're going to pull all of these things that we've learned these last few weeks together into a single purpose. You'll see that at the very end, but we're going to work our way down. So the first thing is that we're going to cover two types of maps. Last week we had journey maps. Now we're getting into message maps and content maps. And I wish I could use a different noun besides maps, but these are what's really familiar. And honestly, they all build off of each other. So they're all in that same realm, but it can be a little bit confusing. In fact, as our proofreader was going through our download, she's like, is there a distinction between message map and content maps? I was like, yeah, you should watch the presentation. So message maps and content maps help you align your messaging to your goals and your personas and your journey maps. So all of those things combine into your message maps and your content maps. Well, what is a message map? Let's start there. This is probably a little bit more common than a content map. And I first learned about message maps and how they were really used in a practical sense from our director of marketing here at CPH. He used to be the director of retail operations at Busch Stadium with the Cardinals. And he learned about this during his public relation training. Every year at the beginning of the season, the news teams would come in and be like, what's new and exciting in your store this year? And so he would work with the Cardinals and their media team to really get a good story down. The message map is a visual representation of your primary messages. It helps you know exactly where to keep the conversation. So this is what it looks like. And I'll go back to that Cardinals example. When he talked about what was new in the store, he listed several different things and he would map them out literally just like this and have that mental picture in his head. And when he was asked a question, he could jump to one or the other. And it all tied back to the singular focus. Well, as I heard about that, I was like, why aren't churches doing that? And he's like, I don't know. It made sense in that setting. It can definitely make sense in our setting. And I've heard about this time and time again. I went through some social media training, and the leader of the course actually helped out with the city of Ferguson during the Michael Brown shooting. What a tense situation that was several years ago. I know it was nationwide news. It was especially important here in the St. Louis area. And so learning from her and how she talked about it, she brought up the message map. Again, it's about sticking with the primary message, branching off, but never off the map. So let's dig into this a little bit more. The first thing right in the center is your ministry's mission statement. It's why you're here. I like to describe it as the way that you are pursuing, or your church is pursuing, the Great Commission in this time and in this place. It all ties right back to Christ. Everything we do, no matter where we are at, it should be tied back to Christ. And if it doesn't, well, obviously that's a different issue. But as you talk about it, you should always be able to bring it back to what Christ has done for us. That's our mission statement. Our mission statement is to share that with everyone else in this time and place. So that's the central focus. Well, you can branch out from there by adding the different emphases of your mission statement. So if there's something particular that you're doing that another ministry is not, or that sets you apart from the ministry down the street, whether you're a church or a school or nonprofit organization, there's things that you do on a day-to-day basis that are different from everyone else. That's why you exist. Well, there's also the ministry goals that we've described in great details. Those are less of an emphasis long-term and very much focused on the here and now. And so both of these things become talking points for your church. Then from there, you have just messages. These are the very specific practical examples of how you're pursuing your mission statement. And they always tie back to one of these bigger emphases. So whether it's a mission emphasis or a ministry goal, You're doing things that all bring it back to the mission statement, and that's where you talk about it. And then finally, the last thing, in a very practical way, is you have some detailed talking points, some very specific things that you want to bring up time and time again. And so if you look at a single event, let's talk about Vacation Bible School. I've been talking about that a lot in my house because my wife is one of the leaders of our church's VBS. I've been using it as examples in other training webinars because VBS is kind of a perfect example of all the things that you do in a church in terms of communication and event planning in a singular week or series of weeks, however your church does it. And so when you talk about something like VBS, you want to make sure you have your individual talking points, the when, the how. How is VBS happening this year when everyone is staying at home? Why are you doing that? Then that comes back into your ministry goals. Then that comes back into your mission statement. Now you could bounce around and get even more in there, but if you stick on those same subjects, those same topics, you can easily know how it connects all the way back to your mission statement. Now, as you think about that, the value of this goes far beyond just your digital communication, your print communication. It can really influence everything. It can be talking points from within your sermon. It can be part of your conversations with potential members. It's a tool for you to use and for your members to use to always bring things back to your mission. So that's why I like it so much. Well, why are they important? I've kind of given some spoiler alerts already. Well, message maps keep your communication consistent by keeping your messages aligned, meaning they have a structure. You're really not all over the map because everything ties back together. Now, if you start at those talking points or even bring it in and talk at the message level, and you didn't have that central focus to begin with, you could come up with all of the messages that you have at your church. I'm sure that for the most part, you could just pull up your weekly bulletin or your newsletter and see all of those different messages. Well, where is the structure? How do they tie them back in together? That's the key part. How do you do that on a conversation level? If somebody says, well, what does your church do? Well, how do you answer that? You might answer it at a very broad level, but they're like, no, very specifically, what kind of things go on at your church? How do you answer that if you don't have a structure? It's kind of a scatterbrained approach. So messages keep everything consistent and aligned, but they also help you prioritize your communications, always pointing back to your mission statement. Your mission, why you exist, is far more important than any one other thing on there or any other thing on there. If your first focus is to jump to the message, you lose the why. Sure, you get the what and the when and all of that. But if you don't have that why, then you don't have that connection back to Christ. And that's why we have this message map that shows the why of everything. So here's an example. There's our mission statement. One of our emphases is we receive the means of grace through regular worship. That's something that we talk about consistently. And we've got a couple of goals up there: increase active participation in Bible studies. We've talked about that quite a bit. Then another one, grow average weekly Sunday school attendance to 50 kids. Well, from there, we can talk about how we do that. So regular worship, we do that through Sunday morning, and we also have a midweek service for those who can't attend on Sunday morning. Bible study, well, we have our all-congregation Bible study coming up, and we also have small group Bible studies. And then finally, we have our rally day coming up in a few months for our Sunday school. We really want people to come and learn about Jesus and sharing that with their kids. And then we also have the every week Sunday school. Every Sunday we invite people to bring their kids to Sunday school while they attend the Bible study. Each of those are really great messages, and you can point to why they all tie back to your mission, why you exist at this time and place. Now, there's other ways of doing that. That's one visual. In your handout, you will see there's a sample message map that puts it in very much a block structure, but it's all tied back. Now, I like the circle structure because it's a little bit more visual. It's for me, it's easier to remember where everything is placed. using different colors, different sizes, maybe even different icons in some places. But that's a lot harder to put in a template. There's a lot of great tools. You can use PowerPoint. That's one I've used before for message maps. But we put it in this kind of structure for the download. Now, PowerPoint also has some really cool tools that give you this blocky structure. And I don't know if I can easily show this, but I'm going to try because I think it's very valuable. If I pull over my actual PowerPoint presentation, and we'll zoom in so you can see it. Good, hopefully you can see that. When I click on this and I go here to edit text, oops, right here, this little arrow, you'll notice that my entire message map is actually from an outline. And so it's a really cool way of doing it. It's called the table hierarchy. It's part of the Smart Art graphics. I think I talked about that the other week too. But if you want a real quick and easy visual message map, just use PowerPoint. Use the Smart Art, pull it together, and you'll get something like this. Now, can you do better than that? Sure, if you've got the design skills. And I'm sure if you don't, there's somebody in your congregation who does. But this is at least a way to get that structure in place. So this is a real common approach. There's a variety of different ways you can do it. Let me get that out of my way so I'm not distracted by that. All right, well, let's talk about some practical examples about how you might use a message map. Bulletin and newsletters. We do a lot of digital communication. I prefer digital communication. That's part of, maybe my demographic, maybe it's my persona, maybe it's just the fact that I use that all day in my job. Bulletins and newsletters are still very common, printed or digital, either way, that kind of structure. Well, if you structure your messages in your bulletin or newsletter around your message map, you really get that outline again. As we look back at what we just did in PowerPoint, you get this outline of things. And so if you have some key emphases, maybe those are your sections of your newsletter or your bulletin. And then everything underneath that is one of those messages. And then within the context of the paragraphs, you have your key talking points. It can become as simple as that, where that helps you really fill the space. I hear that a lot, that people are getting messages in for their bulletin on a weekly basis at different times during the week and not sure where to put it. Well, if you have this structure and maybe you have a page with an extra blank spot, you can say, okay, well, what should I share in there? Well, let's go back to the message map, see what my primary messages are, how we're doing it in the practical sense. That goes in there. The other thing this allows you to do is it allows you to say no. And we've talked about that several times, that a lot of why you put this strategy together is just so you can learn how to say no that doesn't align with what we're doing right here. It may be a very good and valid thing, but it distracts from the main point. And so if you have this structure in place, you have this message map, you are allowed to say no to things that don't align with it. Then it's all over the map, that phrase. No, we don't want it all over the map. We want it structured because it supports our overall mission. Well, social media. Social media is a wonderful digital tool. We'll be talking about that quite a bit next week. How does the message map help with social media? Well, first off, it provides relevant messaging. One of the common things that I hear and I'll see in these different Facebook groups for church communicators is, I've run out of things to post. Any ideas? What have you posted recently? And I don't typically hear that around Easter or Christmas, but during the middle of summer or right in that February timeframe before Easter starts and there's not much else going on, well, what do you post? Well, go back to your message map. These are things that you don't just share once. You emphasize them time and time again, because again, it all points back to why you exist. It also keeps your post consistent. And you can do some really neat things with design to show how it points back to that. You've probably seen different brands who have different colors for different emphases. And we talked about that during our branding guide at my church, where we have different colors with different priorities in our congregation. Now, we haven't always stuck with it, and I'm disappointed that we haven't. I don't get involved on the day-to-day stuff as much as I would like to because I don't work there. But you could do some really neat things if you keep your post consistent, keep your visuals consistent, and tie it right back to your mission. It also works as an idea generator, kind of like the filling the space in the bulletin. You might not have something to talk about on social media, and you can think of what are some other ways that we have been pursuing these emphases. So those are just a few ideas. We're going to talk about social media quite a bit next week and how to use it strategically. Well, what about your church website? One way that I've seen it work really well is if you direct your navigation around your goals. If you have very specific goals or emphases and you have your navigation show those pages, it works just in that same way where it aligns everything back to your mission. You can, if your focus is on preschool and spiritual maturity and outreach to the community, those are very different topics, but you'll have different ways you pursue that. And so those are your primary navigation and everything goes underneath it. Now you may still have your standard about us or service times or other emphases that are not part of your critical targets or however you define it, but you can still use those as that primary drop down, that primary navigation, and everything else flows underneath that. That outlines the visual weight. That's probably not the best way of saying it, but I don't know how to put it in other terms that as you look at things, the things that are larger and bolder are the most important things. And so how do you pick what's most important? How do you pick which banners go up at the top and which ones are in the small banners below that? How do you emphasize your messaging? Well, a message map tells you which comes first. And so if you go and do a quick look at your website, the things that you see first should be closest to your mission. It also helps clarify perceptions. So what is this church about? Well, if your whole website is emphasizing Sunday morning worship and you have ministry goals that are all outside Sunday morning worship, well, what kind of message is the person who comes to worship going to get when everything else is revolving around going out into the community? Certainly, maybe worship isn't the best example because we all need to prioritize that. That's where we get the gifts of Christ. But what is your priority the other days of the week? That's where you get to align what your website is with what you actually are doing. So it helps clarify who your church is. And I could talk all day about websites. That'll be in a few weeks. All right, also your announcements. This is a thing that I know a lot of churches struggle with. There's a lot of different ideas on how to make announcements in churches. Do you spend your time directing people to somewhere else where they can find their information? Do you spend your time giving them the information because you have their attention right then? There's a lot of different approaches, but I think if you have that message map, regardless of which way you go, it at least helps you choose the right message. So that's a perfect time to get people's attention. You don't want to waste it by everyone's priorities coming at one time. And I've seen that happen at our church where we'll talk about different events and everybody wants to jump into, well, maybe pastor could announce that at the beginning of church, or maybe we could have somebody else go up and announce it. Well, that's valuable time. You can't emphasize everything all the time. If everything is important, then nothing is important. Having a message map helps you prioritize. So you also have this opportunity to share what your priorities are. So it's either by prioritizing the message or literally saying our priorities as a church are A, B, and C. And so we're going to talk about things that support that. You can do that in a very structured way, very blatant way of declaring your priorities. Everybody should know that, but that reminder is excellent. It also keeps people excited. If you don't have announcements at your church, it doesn't tell that story of what happens outside of worship services. And so there's a lot of value in doing that, a lot of value in keeping people excited. If you have timed ministry goals, make sure you're continuing to emphasize that during your announcements. Now, there are some important messages that may not have a place on your message map. And when I originally presented this a few years ago, I focused primarily on goals and always emphasizing your goals. But as I've come to learn over the last few years, there are things that fall outside of goals. There are things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis that are as important, if not more important, than your goals. And that's where I tie in that mission statement, those kind of mission emphases, the parts of your mission statement that you're going to do no matter what year it is. They are the unique reason why you exist. But there's still some things that come out besides that. And the first thing that came to mind was funerals. Funerals are probably never going to end up on your message map because they're not things that people look forward to. They are not things that we get excited to talk about, but they are important and they need to be communicated. And so I would hate for anyone to ever say, well, we're not going to share that the funeral is Tuesday at 10 o'clock because that doesn't fit in our message map. So that's my little disclaimer that you have to use some good sense and understand when there are some messages that are still important to share outside of your message map. But I still think it's valid that the majority of your messages can be shaped right into that structure and everything else can be downplayed or not shared at all. It just doesn't have that same level of importance. I'd love to hear any questions before we jump into content map. Brian says, yeah, I noticed your examples of the message map, you didn't include CTAs. It seems more informational in nature. For communication, should it include CTAs as long as you only have one CTA per announcement? Well, I think the content map's going to help with that. It's a really interesting question. There are assumed CTAs in your message map when you talk about talk about events. The emphasis is on bringing people into that. But you'll see in a few minutes where the CTAs really come into play in the content map. CTA, Gene, is a call to action, and that's the next step. I think you'll see more in just a moment. All right, good. Well, this is an interesting one. I'm going to have to follow up with Robert later. Does the importance of a message fall under the Franklin Covey importance grid? I'm not as familiar with that. I've heard of it, but I don't know it. So I'll get back to you. I'm curious to see what that is. All right, let's move into content maps next. So what is a content map? Well, a content map shows the message you wish to communicate with your personas at different stages of your journey map. It is, and I'll clarify this in a little bit, but I think this is an important thing to emphasize. It is documenting the things that we naturally do when we speak with other people. So let me use our example church here. We're not going to show all the examples today because I'm really going to dive into this one. Christ Community Church, our large church in a growing suburb. The goal of increasing Bible study attendance to 35% of the congregation for our summer Bible study. As you look at our different personas, Millennial Melody, 40-ish Fred, older adult Alice, imagine you are sitting down and having coffee with each one of them. How would you talk to them, try to convince them to come to Bible study? Would it be the same conversation with each person? Would you have the same level of comfort asking each one what to do next? Would you explain it in the same way of why this is important to them? Of course not. They all have different priorities. They all have different ways of communicating. And if you think about if you're not at coffee, well, how do you reach them? So that's where that persona comes in. Now, I think we take for granted how much we do this naturally, because every conversation, we contextualize it for the person. We do that in our homes. I think about the difference between how I talk with my 7-year-old son and my 4-year-old daughter. They are not that far apart in age. They have very different personalities and they have very different priorities. So if I want one of them to come on a run with me, I'm going to say different to Sawyer than to Melody. Just the way that I talk with them is naturally different because they're different people. And so in the church, on one-to-one communication, we're really good at that. But then when we start getting broader and we have things like a bulletin or a newsletter, like emails or social media, we take this kind of one-size-fits-all approach far too often. And it doesn't always work. In fact, it doesn't often work. It'll work for the people that prefer that means of communication, but it's not the best way to reach people. We don't do it in person. Why would we do it when we're communicating as a whole? So these are the personas that we're going to be talking about. This is our journey map. We've talked about this quite a bit. Now, content map takes these two things. And remember, our journey map is tied back to our ministry emphasis, our mission statement, and our goals. So that's included in here. I'm going to assume that I'm not highlighting that in each example, but we've talked about goals enough that I think you'll see how this brings that into the picture too. So let's take this journey map, let's stretch it out, and then let's overlay our personas on that. This becomes our content map. As we look at the appropriate message for each person at each stage, and we begin to map that out, you're going to start to see many opportunities for content. And remember, this is our simple journey map. I showed a bunch of examples of complex journey maps before, but I'm going to go with this as our simple approach because the concepts are the same. And I think the first thing you'll probably say, and it's fun when I present this in person to people, because everybody's getting excited and then they see this and there's almost a sticker shock like, oh man, I've got a lot of work to do. Yes, but, and I'll clarify that in just a few moments. The first thing I want to talk about is what goes in each one of these things. I put content out there. Content is such a buzzword within marketing. There are all sorts of different ways you can generate content. There's an organization called the Content Marketing Institute. I went to their conference a few years ago, a phenomenal conference, and we'll talk about that some in a couple weeks, about some of the different strategies people use with content. Well, content is, well, I'll get to this next slide. What is content? Content ultimately is the right message delivered to the right audience at the right time. That is a very broad definition, but that's really what you're striving for. Now, we talked about the right audience. Those are our personas. We talked about the right time. That's our journey map. Now we get into the right message, and that's where that message map comes in. And you'll see how it is very closely aligned to it. So the delivery vehicle and the wording will vary by persona, but the purpose is the same. The purpose is to move them into that next step. So we talked about CTAs a few moments ago, well, that call to action. What are you calling your persona to do? That's going to vary based on your journey map. How you go about doing it, the words you say will vary by the persona. So let's take a look. I just threw a few things out there. The difference between an email and a text message is the personal nature of that. An email has less of an expected time frame for response than a text message. The difference between a blog post and a video may just be that audience. You know, there's people who prefer to read and people who prefer to watch, and you could say that it's demographics, but I could make the argument otherwise. It's just different types of persona. And so you could go through each one of these social media posts, what's on your website, a physical letter, a phone call, you know, having individuals make phone calls, or a flyer that you hand out at the event that calls people to that next action. Maybe it's an advertisement that's online or on a billboard. You know, there's different stages of the journey map where each one of those is more appropriate, and certainly by persona. And that's what we're going to look at. The key thing is there's no one size fits all communication. And if I can emphasize that any more than I already have, there's no one size fits all. I hope that is very clear. Oftentimes I'll have people be like, okay, well, what's the right next step? Huh? Tell me about your situation. Now, I do want to emphasize that a lot of this can be automated. Manual efforts are going to happen no matter what, and especially with some more of those physical pieces, the letters, the flyers, and all of that. But the tools are out there to automate this more and more and more. And so you think about if part of your journey map is to register for an event, or maybe it is to say, well, that this person attended it, a few days later I want to reach out to them. Find those tools where it allows you to automate that next step, whether it's an email or a text message. There are a lot of great tools out there. I've done trainings on them before. You can find that on our YouTube channel. I can point you to it. But things like if this, then that, or Zapier. Zapier is an automation tool. There's tools like HubSpot that have free plans where you can set up what's called workflows and say, when this happens, then take this action. There's a lot of really cool things out there. Now, don't dive right into the automation, because then your strategy will be geared toward what you can automate as opposed to what's right for your audience. But I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. As you're planning this out, you don't have to do everything manually. You don't have to do everything on your own. And so if that can alleviate some of your concern of all of the different amounts of content you're going to have to create. That hopefully will help. But we'll talk about, do you have to create all of it in a minute. Let's talk through the actual process of crafting a content map. So we'll go into these steps one by one. Content mapping takes what you already do, whether it's on a one-to-one basis or what you're doing as your church, puts it into a plan, a nice structured plan that is based on your strategy, and then helps you find those gaps. It allows you to be specific and relevant with the content you share every time, because every single piece of content has a purpose for that audience and for that time. And really, it ties right back into your message map, pointing to your mission statement. So I hope that makes sense. It's a combination of these things, the journey map, the personas, and the message map. So first off, list your personas. I'll pull this in from a previous presentation. These are the personas and what makes them different. I showed what makes them the same. You know, there's a lot of things that are the same about them. This is the one that makes them different. And so those will factor into what your next steps are. All right, so you've got your personas, then review your journey map. I've spent a lot of time on journey maps lately. That shouldn't be too hard. Here is our great example. Again, those stages at the top identify the timing between the actions. The actions are what your CTA should point to. So if your action is attended a Bible study, the call to action is one step before that says, hey, would you like to attend a Bible study? You know, it's that question, that ask of your audience, of your personas, of your individual people. What is their next step? You're calling them to take that action. So that's the CTA. Gene asked that before. I hope that clarifies that a little bit, but I'll give you some more examples. After that, make a matrix for content. And matrix, not the movie Matrix, the series from 20 plus years ago now. No, make a matrix where you have essentially a grid. Maybe a grid would have been a better word. I like using matrix. So like I showed before, you stretch out your journey map, you plot your people, your personas on that. And again, this is an example. As we talked, you may have up to 8 different personas. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I hesitate to show 8 because when you show 8 and you multiply the content out by your different stages, it gets even more overwhelming than what I showed before. But the next thing is enter and evaluate your current communication. Well, what does that look like? So you might be able to go through and identify different pieces. And right now, those pieces may be going for multiple stages or multiple personas. You look at that and say, okay, from the prospect side, we have a billboard out by the highway that we really like. It's not targeting anyone in particular. It's targeting everyone. So I'll stretch that across all prospects. And that's not bad. It's not as personalized as it could be. And you can say, well, when visitors attend worship for the first time, we have a nice follow-up visit. But the people that fit in our 40-ish Fred, we never actually see them. All we ever do is ring their doorbell and find out they're not home. And so we never quite connect with them. So I can't really say that fits on that one. And after people start a new member class, we don't talk to them again until they become confirmed members. If you take an honest evaluation, you can see where you are doing things well and where you are doing things poorly. But you'll see there's already a good start on a lot of these. And so while you may have to create more, you might have things that are ready to go. You might have things that can be tweaked and modified for that next step. So you're not starting at scratch from everything, but you have to take that step first to evaluate, list everything. We're going to talk about next week about identifying your digital and a footprint. We'll bring in the physical side of things too. I think you'll find far less on that, but maybe there's more than I'm thinking. But you are essentially taking a whole collection of everything that you do, figure out where it goes on the map. And if you take one piece of communication and you're struggling to figure out where it goes, maybe that's one to set aside for a time. Maybe that's one you don't need anymore. So that evaluation process is key. Then you find those gaps. And so as you take what you already have and you fit it and you tweak it and put it in appropriate places, you're going to identify all of these other places where you need something new. well, that's when you really start to have the fun. You see, there's this kind of becomes your checklist, and you're not going to be able to accomplish it all at once. You can use your ministry goals and your emphases to figure out where to start. Like we showed last week, there will be sections of your journey map that are tied to a goal where everything else is a lower emphasis. Well, focus on the ones that are tied to your goal. Get the great content out for that now. Fill in some of the other gaps later on. Develop the content. Well, that's the fun one. How do you go about filling this map with different things? Well, like I just mentioned, this will take time. Do what you can do now and improve as you go. I don't see this being a couple-week process, especially because you're going to learn what's effective and you're going to make tweaks to the things that you are making now. So you're just going to continue to develop and evolve. And one of the things that we did here at CTS is we said, okay, well, we've got these, I think we started out with 6 personas. We ended up getting to 8. We got these 6 personas. I can't make something unique for each one right now, but I could make 2 things that really overlap all 6 in one way or another. We'll start with that, break it down, get more and more specific as you go. It's okay to start general and narrow it down as long as you understand the direction you're headed. We all have that restriction of time and certainly the restriction of energy too. So let's take a look at a few example content maps. And I'll caution you, these are pretty basic, but my goal is to show you the differences between your personas. So the first one that we have here, we're going to look at our friend, Millennial Melody. So we'll pull her out of the matrix. That not the movie. Again, I had a different visual there. We'll take her out of the grid and say, who is Millennial Melody again? Melody is a single 25-year-old who is actively involved in youth group as a teen and is trying to regain a connection to the church as an adult. Well, remember that first step where she kind of comes into our journey map is by attending a fellowship event. Now we could do a few steps before that. How did we get her into that? We'll talk about that more next week. But after she attends a fellowship event, we'll send her an email thanking her for coming to the event and inviting her to attend worship. That's all we know about her at this time. Well, then after she attends worship, she fills out that card, lets us know that she's there. She puts her phone number. We'll just send her a text inviting her to come to Bible study the next Sunday. Well, great, she comes to Bible study. While she's there, we can say, we've got this great blog post that we just shared about the body of Christ and how all members have a unique role. She had, in that persona, she is looking for a connection with the church. And so we talk about that aspect of connection within the body of Christ. Well, some time passes, it doesn't usually happen real quick, but she joins a new member class. That's one of those things. If we talk about call to actions, you have a blog post about the body of Christ, your call to action becomes, would you like to join the body of Christ and use your unique gifts that God has given you within the context of our church? Well, the next step is to join as a member. Go through our new member class, learn what we're about, learn about our faith. That provides that very natural next step. Well, then as she's starting with the new member class, you can point her back to your website where you have all the steps or expectations. It's a singular focused page all about that new member process. That's something that a lot of you probably already have, answers the question, well, what do I do to become a new member? Well, Melody, she prefers to go to the website for it. Well, she finishes the new member class, becomes a confirmed member. We want to make sure that she's attending worship regularly. And so, as is natural in many churches, she gets a follow-up phone call from her elder welcoming her as a new member. Well, she continues to attend regularly, and over time, we encourage her to regularly attend Bible study. And that's where a text with a nice personal invitation from somebody who's going to be at small group say, hey, would you like to join me at our small group Bible study? So you're following through. There's different delivery vehicles along the way with different expectations. Now, let's take a step back and go to 40-ish Fred. Well, how do we approach him? He's our 42-year-old father whose schedule revolves around kids and work. It's a struggle to get involved in much of anything outside of worship. Well, jump back to the beginning of the journey map. After he attends that fellowship event, you email him thanking him for coming to the event, inviting him to attend worship. Now, what you email him will be different than what you email Millennial Melody, but it's that same delivery vehicle. The messaging might be a little bit different. Well, after he attends worship, you send him another email. You have put him in this persona. You have this understanding of who he is versus your other personas, and an email will work best. And in that email, you mention the free childcare because you understand he has kids. You know, that's one of those things that is important for people at that stage of life that is not important for people in the other stages. The next one is a blog post about multi-generational ministry opportunities for families. It's not about the body of Christ. Certainly that ties into it. The emphasis, though, is around the different things for a family to get involved in. After new member class, you share videos of the new member class online because there's a good chance he's not going to be able to make each one of them, but this allows him to continue on. He can watch at his convenience and not fall out of that process. After he becomes a new member, you follow up with a call from his elder, and the elder might mention the midweek worship services in addition to the Sunday ones. You know, for him, that timing option is a key thing. And then finally, you invite him to a lecture-based Bible study with childcare provided. You'll see how the message changes. The call to action is slightly different. It leads them along the journey in the same way. All right, one more example, and then I'll wrap up. Older adult Alice, 72 years old, just starting to admit she needs assistance, fearful of losing her independence. We've talked about her before. How you approach her is going to be very different than the other two. All right, after she attends the fellowship event, you know, she doesn't have an email. She called the church to register for the fellowship event. Well, give her a phone call back, thank her for attending, and invite her to worship. After worship, she'll respond very well to an in-person thank you gift and invitation to Bible study next week. Same call to action, different approach, different delivery vehicle. Well, after she attends Bible study, you can hand her a flyer about the benefits of becoming a member and information about classes. You know, she's pretty straightforward. She just needs to know that information, what is expected. After new member class, make sure you hand her printed worksheets. She's not active online. She's not going to go to the website. She's not going to watch videos. But if you give her worksheets, she's going to complete them and bring them back. Well, after she becomes a member, a follow-up phone call. You know, that same phone call, but with different messaging. For her, it's reminding her of the different transportation assistant options to bring people back to worship, those who are not able to drive. And then finally, you know, after she's attending, a phone call for the discussion-based Bible study. You know, that's what she's really interested in. She, like Melody, is looking for fellowship. They're looking for it in different ways. An evening small group is not going to work for Alice, but a discussion-based Bible study on a Sunday morning after worship might. So you see how all of these have similarities, but different means of accomplishing them. They're all on that same journey map, but you really change out what your actions are based on each individual persona. And that's why that personas are so important. That's why the journey map is so important. It all ties together. All right, in the handout, we present this in a slightly different way. Again, this is one of those ones where the visuals don't matter as much as the work that goes into it. And so we present it in this nice vertical structure that essentially does the same thing, but we've provided the details so you don't have to go back to each individual slide. All right, my TLDR for this week. It's about the right message for the right person at the right time. That's what your content map is all about. It's documenting the things that we do naturally in conversations. You know, this is not something that anyone needs to be trained how to do. We see the example all the time. We live it out in our day-to-day lives. We talk to people differently depending on who they are and where they're at in their life. That's just how it goes. Our communication should be the same. We should be able to scale this as much as possible, knowing that it's different than a face-to-face conversation, but knowing that it works in just the same way. And then finally, it's better to start implementing now than to wait for everything. Do what you can now. Grow as you go. It's all about being strategic, setting up the tools in the right way at the beginning so that you can reach that end later on. You're not going to get this all at once. Don't wait until you have everything ready to go to start implementing things. Do what you can now. You can dive in deeper to this with our blog post that'll be launching in about 6 minutes, personalizing communications through content mapping. So that will be on our blog. If you haven't subscribed for our blog, I encourage you to do it. This isn't the only thing we post on there. We often have guest authors who will write on a number of different topics. I think we're up well over 300 blog posts right now. The content map worksheet is available in our handout. So if you haven't done that yet, please go ahead and download that. I will be linking to it both in our resource center tomorrow morning and in the email that I sent to you. So I know some people have had trouble downloading it through the handouts and the GoToWebinar tool. Don't worry, we'll get it to you one way or the other. And then finally, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, if that's the most convenient way for you to access things, please go ahead and do that. Occasionally I post questions in there. I've been answering most of the questions live, so I haven't had as many to post in there as I thought I would, but feel free to ask questions in the group too. I'd love to hear from you. I would love to hear other answers from people. So just know that that is available for you. The URL is up on the screen. Next week, we get into social media, and it's establishing your outposts. If that phrase sounds a little weird to you, don't worry, I'll explain that next week. That ties into what I call a framework. This is something I learned a few years ago from a rather well-known marketing speaker, Chris Brogan. It's a fun topic. It was part of a keynote speech that he gave. And when it wasn't the primary part of the speech, he mentioned this, and I couldn't think about anything else until I went and looked up and started figuring out how it works in the church. So I'm excited to share that with you next Tuesday, May 26th at 1 o'clock Central Time. Now, let's get into our Q&A. What time? Oh man, I went to that 55 or 56 minute mark, so I didn't quite get to my goal, but this is pretty typical of me. So I'm going to go ahead and go back up to the top, see what kind of questions I have. And in fact, I'm going to move it over here. I don't think you guys can see this overlay. I'm going to take a quick drink as I start looking through these. All right, Lori asked the question, will next week's session on social media include using Facebook Live to stream a church service live? Well, Lori's already left, but I'll tell you, we may touch on that a little bit. Again, this is a strategy training course. I've got a whole blog post that I shared on our blog a couple months ago at this point, right as the pandemic hit, about how to live stream your services for the first time. So if any of you are interested, I know Lori's already left, but if anybody else is interested in that, I'd encourage you to go to our blog and find that post. Had a lot of good feedback. I've made a few tweaks to it. We've been using that process at my church and it's been going really well. So that won't be the focus for next week, but we'll talk about how to use Facebook strategically and where things like Facebook Live come into play. Let's see. All right, I'm going to continue down. Gary says there seems to be a continuous work on announcements on Sunday. Yes, there is. There's lots of work to be done with announcements. I agree, Gary. And he says, can you send us or make available some of your slides that I may use as examples in developing our communication? I'll be able to use these templates and get more done altering for our community than have to start from scratch. Absolutely. In fact, in our resource center, I link to our slides on SlideShare. So I've been uploading those each week and you can go and see the slide deck. I cut out the beginning portion where I do the recap because you don't need that every single time, but it's the new material. So that goes in our resource center. And unfortunately, Gary, you can't access the Facebook source without signing up for Facebook. That is one of the requirements of the Facebook group, that you do have to be signed up for Facebook. But I'll tell you, most of what I put in there is also in the resource center. All right. Chris says, when working with social media, would you create different groups of friends or followers for different personas to target your posts? That is a fascinating question, Chris. And that is something that I would absolutely encourage you to test out. There is a law of diminishing returns as you get into really segmenting each message. It almost becomes more about dictating which messages you send out on each channel based on persona, or how you for example, in social media, it's a hit or miss if you're going to show up in people's newsfeed. Because of the way the algorithm works, your post may not be seen. Now, if they're in a group, it's more likely. If they've engaged with your posts before, it's more likely. But you could go to a lot of work of really segmenting your audience for different posts and still not have it show up in the newsfeed. So in that particular example, I'd caution you. Now, if you look at like email, a lot of people see success. We see tremendous success with email. I tend to spend more of my time personalizing emails because I know that the response rate is going to be better, because emails in general are more reliable to get a response. But then on the social media side, aside from posts, if you're doing any advertising, they make the tools so easy to target and segment that if you're doing that side of things, Facebook wants you to spend money. Well, on that side of things, then absolutely personalize it. So it's going to depend, and I encourage you to test it all out and see where the success comes in, because it will be different for every church. And it always works better than what you might get with a general message, but there is going to be that time versus return that you're going to have to look at. So something specifically like social media posts where algorithms come into play, I'm a little bit cautious on, but absolutely the idea is excellent. All right, next up, Karen says, on the message map, is it fair to say that mission emphasis is general, whereas ministry goal is specific? I think that's very fair to say. I prefer to think of it as mission emphasis is things that are done on an ongoing basis that are just as important, if not more important, than goals, whereas goals are done on a time-sensitive basis, meaning that there will be an end in the near future. So I hope that distinction makes sense, but I think what you're saying is right. Mission emphasis will typically be more general. Goals should fall under that SMART criteria: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely, or relevant, timely. So all of those, that makes it very specific. All right. Brian says, you recommend no more than 8 personas. Sound great. How many content or message maps do you recommend? Is it basically one content message map per large goal of the church, or could there be more various smaller events? I would say one content map per journey map, and not all of your personas will necessarily be on each journey map. We talked about that last time. If you're a church and school, you might have some that are just over on the school side, some that are on the church side. If you have multiple message maps, or if you have a split or merged message map, then it'll be, I don't know whether you'd call that one or two. If you have multiple message maps, certainly then you'd have multiple content maps. I think I said that wrong. If you have multiple journey maps, then you'll have multiple content maps. On the message map side of things, I think you could probably just have one in most situations. It might just be a little bit larger if you have a lot of ministry goals. Now, your message map will not be dependent on your personas at all. It'll have some ties to your journey map, but it's really at that higher level of what things are important to talk about as a ministry. And the journey map then brings in the timing and the personas. So there is a distinction there. But I think you probably will only need one message map. I can't think of really any situation off the top of my head. When we're talking about strategy, you could do a message map for an individual event. You could do a message map for an individual, like I mentioned before, the Cardinals example of being interviewed. Well, yeah, message maps for a single interview are very important. That's a different example of a message map. But as we talk about your church communication strategy, I think one message map is just fine. Sarah says, we have so many messages for Sunday and everyone seems to fit with our goal. With a congregation of over 1,500 people, we have a lot of different ministries. How do you choose which ones to act if they all fit the goal? Well, if they all fit the goal, it may be that your goal is a bit too broad. That's a different discussion. Obviously, that goes back to one of our first sessions. But then I'd say bring your personas into that and say when you are, depending on where you're talking, if you're talking about announcements, that's the first thing that came to mind. That's going to be a little bit broader. But if you're talking about something like social media or your bulletin or your newsletter, who is the primary persona for that specific vehicle? Well, then narrow your messaging down to what's most important to that specific persona, or bring in your journey map and say, well, where are you sharing this along the journey map? What fits that specific timing best? So it's going to be a struggle. I mean, large churches are going to have that if you have one broad goal. That's where I really like having a bit more specific ministry goals, because it allows you to narrow your focus down more. So I hope that helps, Sarah. Gary says, many of our young people know how to stream and how people are having a worship party. That's pretty cool. That'll get into social media a little bit next week. Karen says, my congregation is way overdue to revisit and I'm sure revise our mission statement. Are there tools or resources that you could recommend that would assist us in the best steps to go through coming up with a new mission statement? There are a number out there. Mission statements are not my strength. I'll have to do a little bit of thinking on which ones to recommend, since I haven't spent a bunch of time on mission statements. But let me get back to you on that one, Karen. All right, next up, Linda says, do you have any suggestions on how to secure a visitor's email and phone number? Well, this comes into play with a number of different things. I think more than anything, what you need to do is to be able to respect the individual's wishes if they want their information removed. I believe it was 2 years ago now that GDPR out of Europe came into play, and that was all about the right to be forgotten. So if somebody gives you their information, and they decide, I no longer want to hear from you, please forget me forever. You have to have the tools in place to permanently remove them from your database and permanently remove their address. Now, that from a legal standpoint doesn't apply to churches in the US. And really it doesn't apply to businesses in the US at this point, unless you're doing a lot of business over in Europe. We're not talking about businesses, we're talking about churches. I think this is where the spirit of the law is still very important. If people are used to being able to be forgotten and they ask that of your church, then yes, absolutely you should honor that. There's no reason in pushing the message at them when they've clearly stated they don't want to. Now, in terms of a security perspective, that gets a little bit dicier. Now, if you're talking about digital tools where you store their email and phone number, I think in most cases, the reliable tools are gonna have the right security built into it. So I wouldn't be too worried as long as you're not using something that is a little bit iffy. If you're using an emailing tool like a MailChimp or Constant Contact, those have good security. If you're thinking about getting it from people, if they're writing it down on a card and putting it into the offering plate or passing it to somebody, there's some other issues there. That probably goes beyond what we can cover today. But I think, and we'll talk about this some in 2 weeks, along the lines of the church website, we're gonna mention email. I think that's where you really need to consider what are businesses doing, what are the regulations applied to businesses, and how does that apply to your church? So we'll talk about that a little bit more then. So I hate to push that off, but I think I could talk about that for the next half hour or more, and I don't think that's valuable to everybody. All right. Gary says, I've been told that if you tag instead of share, you are more likely to be limited by an algorithm. There's a lot of different thoughts on that and how to not be limited by an algorithm. I'll talk about that next week when we talk about social media and what are my recommended strategies. Everybody's got an idea. Mine's a little bit different than most, and well, I shouldn't say different than most. There's a lot of people that share my strategy for social media, but it's less about things like tagging. It's more about understanding what the algorithm is looking for and providing some really positive things. Lori says, is it fair to say personas reflect life stages more than demographics? I think in some cases it is. In our persona training, we talked about the different way to split up personas. And I think you're definitely onto something, that demographics can sometimes be far too specific. And that when we talk about demographics, like especially in my example, I think life stages is more appropriate. But I would put life stage as a subset of demographic as opposed to an alternative. Demographics is a little bit of a broad topic, because you could do it by gender, you could do it by age, you could do it by occupation. Life stage is another one of those things. But I think you're right. In my example, life stage is far more appropriate than demographics. Russell says, is it okay to structure persona profiles based on the stage of the journey map rather than age, i.e. newcomer Natalie, then something like older adult Alice's? Absolutely. That's one of the ones I call dividing by participation. And I think that if that fits for your church, it really simplifies things with the journey map, because you really don't have as many different pieces of content. Now, it depends on your audience. If you have a very similar audience, like I think about, there's a lot of campus ministries in the US at universities, and they have a pretty typical type of audience. Certainly you can divide college students in far more ways than one. However, it's a lot less diverse in terms of, well, like we were talking about a moment ago, life stages than a typical congregation. So yes, absolutely you can do that. I wouldn't say you have to do that, and I wouldn't say no. It's one of those things where it might fit for your journey map depending on what your goals are. That's a really good question. Next up, Ronald is asking, please include the guide to sources of information about mission statements in the blog or group email. I will. I don't know if I'll have that information in time for the email tomorrow morning, but I could put that in the Facebook group when we get it. There's somebody I know who has a much better understanding of how to go about the mission statement process. I think I'm going to reach out to him and see what he would suggest. All right. Oh, and Linda said, sorry, this comes well after and looks like she's left, but not privacy security, obtaining their email and phone number. Sorry, I confused that. That's okay, Linda. There are a number of things, and we'll talk about that on our website thing, but the way to acquire people's information and the way to do it in conjunction with the journey map will be a topic as we get into church websites. That's where I get into that kind of conversion discussion, not the altar call kind of conversion, but the conversion from one stage to the next. All right, I think I covered everything. If I skipped over one or two, I do apologize. I'll go back and look in it after this session, but I am over time by about 12 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up for the day. Thank you so much for attending. I hope this was helpful to you. I enjoy this topic as I enjoy any topic, but I especially appreciate having you here today listening and participating. So thanks so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week.